Ethan Carter I didn't know, but he knew who I was. When the police won't help you and the priests don't believe you, you call on Paul Prospero. You call on me.
There is a famous quote by Joan Didion, and she said, "We tell ourselves stories in order to live, and I see no truer thing that can be said about this game."
Get out of my room, Travis!
Stories, stories, always with the stories.
Get out!
I read the Fangs one. I liked the Beast. At least he gets to leave this goddamn place.
The Vanishing of Ethan Carter was released back in 2014 and later re-released back in 2015 after being ported to the Unreal Engine. The game was released by Astronaut Studios, and since the game has been very widely and very positively received, much has been said about the game. But all of the videos that I saw, all of the videos that reviewed the game did not see what I saw in the game. So here are my 2 cents on it. I think it will be next to impossible to understand the story of this game without knowing the structure of it. We'll divide the game into 3 parts. First, what happened. Second, how did it happen. And third, why did it happen. At the very first glance, this game seems pretty straightforward. You play as Paul Prospero, a supernatural detective who has been called to this Red Creek Valley town by a talented young boy named Ethan in the mid to late 1970s. Since Ethan is very fond of writing fiction, he spends most of his time in his mind, in his thoughts, conjuring up world after world. When you reach the town, you find it to be abandoned and Ethan missing. You proceed with the game and find a newspaper clipping in the jungle that shows the whole family died in a house fire. After putting together clues that you find in the game, you start to piece together the whole story. Ethan, in his eternal pursuit of finding inspiration for his stories, stumbled upon a forbidden room and somehow released this demon which is simply known as the Sleeper.
What did you do? What did you wake up?
Nothing! I found a room, I walked into it, that's it.
You can feel it, right? Something coming from the Vandergriff house.
I can feel it. Ethan disturbed the sleeper. He must be punished.
Further in the game, you figure out that every member of his family was murdered by each other in pursuit of sacrificing Ethan to the Sleeper in order to satiate this demon. Now, which version is true? You, being a supernatural detective, know that family dying in a house fire sounds too straight to be true. With each passing clue, you get more sure that it was the deed of the Sleeper that Ethan is missing and his family is dead.
Ethan's family blamed him. Whatever it was he'd accidentally let loose, his family was convinced that hurting him would solve their problems, would soothe their disturbed minds. Whatever haunted the Carters was still here somewhere, in the wind.
After walking the length and breadth of Red Creek Valley, you finally end up on the pile of burnt ashes of a house that proudly stood once. You enter the house, and in a room in the basement, you finally found Ethan. You finally get to know that protagonist of this story, you, are not real. You're just one of those stories that Ethan wrote, and the whole game took place in Ethan's imagination, as his life fainted away from him. Before we dissect the how of all of this, we must first answer this question. Did this game actually happen? And by actually happen, I mean, did Ethan conjure Paul Prospero into the real world? Or was it all going on inside Ethan's mind? An argument could be made for both, but I would argue that as we see in the game, events leading up to Ethan's death weren't the actual events, but as Ethan perceived them to be. His family wasn't actually possessed by this Sleeper, but were all sane and trying to find him inside the Vandergriff house. But why would then Ethan be surprised to see Paul Prospero when he finds him in the basement room? If all of this was just inside Ethan's own mind, wouldn't Ethan be Paul Prospero himself? Like, we all have been through that pre-adolescent stage in our lives where we imagine to be the hero rather than being someone who was saved by the hero. Keeping this in mind, wouldn't Ethan play as Paul Prospero himself instead of conjuring him up as a separate person? Also, in the beginning of the game, when we cross the abandoned train station, we see that the clock on the station showed two separate times, 7 and 7:04, which if we pay attention to the final scene of the game, we find out that these two times represent the time when the fire actually started and the time when Ethan passed away. Morning or evening, we don't know. Most probably morning, as we can also see that the town of Red Creek Valley is actually suspended in an eternal dawn. No matter how much longer you stay in the game, the time of the day never passes. So we can positively conclude that Paul Prospero wasn't conjured up in real world by some supernatural power that Ethan possessed and then followed the breadcrumbs to Ethan's final resting place, but he was in fact conjured in the virtual world of Ethan's own psyche, unbeknownst to Ethan himself. As Ethan lay there dying, he conjured up this story of this sleeper and his heroic pursuit to end this demon. He did not know that his mind also conjured up Paul Prospero, who is witnessing this story along with him, or Ethan wouldn't be surprised to see him in the end. When it comes down to Ethan's supernatural detective Paul Prospero, he was just a hallucination inside of a hallucination. I truly believe that exploring as to why all of this happened will be harder than usual. Not because the story and narrative style of the game doesn't give us any clues, but because we spend such less or next to no time with Ethan in the game. As we have established that the whole narrative took place in Ethan's own mind and the events portrayed to us were actually false, it gives us no reason to believe the story that Ethan's psyche painted in front of us. We're all heroes in our own utopia. Time and time again we see Ethan bravely trying to fight off his own family members and ultimately defeat the sleeper, while the adults of his family fall and succumb to this evil. The reason Ethan doesn't fall to the will of the sleeper is not because he is mentally stronger than his family, it's because he perceives himself to be, which stems from the overcompensation of his own perceived importance while his family ignored his creative skills all his life.
Ethan, I told you, you can't be here.
But Gramp, I wrote something for you.
That's real nice. Thank you. Just leave it. I'll read it later.
Why are you standing there? You spying?
No?
No, huh? What the hell's wrong with you exactly?
Nothing.
You need to stop leaving your stupid stories around. They're freaking everyone out.
Ethan, the point of life is not to rock the boat. Just try to get along. Stop living in your head. Do something real. That's what people respond to. Reality.
Not only we don't get to know anything about Ethan, we don't actually get to see what his family is like. We only get glimpses of what Ethan's family is actually like through some actual dialogues. Now we can spend a lot of time trying to discern the actual conversation from the fictional in this game. But despite all of the gameplay being a fictional narrative, some of the conversation we do here in the game are actual real life conversations that Ethan actually had with his family. Ethan's father Dale is a beta male in his own house, being constantly bullied by his wife, brother and elder son. We get the impression that he's some sort of inventor, much dismay to his wife. Even in Ethan's own imagination, he doesn't fare too well. Ethan himself imagines his father to be a weak-minded pushover, whose self-respect has been trampled by rejections and bullying, very much like Ethan. Ethan's mother Missy is presented as straightforward, tell-it-like-it-is sort of a woman, and Ethan's uncle Chad is just plain mean, so is his elder brother Travis. Ethan's grandfather, however, is a different story. Ethan's grandfather is a tired old man, but we do get the impression that out of all of his family members, Ethan adores his grandfather the most. Now, character exploration aside, the reason why Ethan conjured up this narrative in his mind is more sad than we think. Rejected by his family, Ethan is forced to live inside his stories, and when in real life he gets trapped inside a room, slowly filling with smoke, as the rest of the house burns down, Ethan's mind conjures up one more story in a last-ditch effort to cling on to life. To not to die because his mother accidentally dropped her oil lantern on the floor of the house, but to die like a hero, saving his family and killing the sleeper. He wanted not to die like a victim, but to die like a hero, not only in his own eyes, but in the eyes of his hero, Paul Prospero as well. Because it is when Paul asks him to let go, is when Ethan finally lets go, with an assurance that this isn't actually the end. There is another beginning, another story.
I wrote about you, but I don't know if I created you.
You made me real.
I can't go yet. I have to finish my story about you. I wrote stories about everyone.
I know you did. But my story's done. And it's a fine story.
I can let go?
You can let go.
What happens then?
Another story, kid. What else?
John Green, in his novel The Fault of Our Stars, famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Whenever you read about cancer, you often read depression mentioned as a side effect of cancer. In reality, depression isn't the side effect of cancer, it's the side effect of dying." In the life of Ethan Carter, it is not so much as literal death that puts Ethan into depression, but the slow death of his inner creative, which is smothered by his family every day. But why do I say that Ethan is in depression? To be honest, I would not presume to have the answer to this question because I risk belittling the people who suffer from it. But the evidence we do find in game is sufficient to point out that Ethan is not right. Prolonged neglect by your family can put you into depression, especially when you don't have the mental tools to cope with the hardships that come with you being neglected. The tools Ethan has is his mind and his creativity. A one-way narrative about a missing boy slowly opens itself to be a meta-commentary on Ethan's own mental state. Ethan is a talented young boy who loves writing stories. Many places in the game, you can find bits and pieces of stories written by Ethan. Not one of those stories has happy endings. The endings are either sad or downright vague. We see that Ethan is incapable of finding a happy ending in his own fictional worlds that he created. From the stories of space, to the witches in jungle, to the Lovecraftian Cthulhu-looking monsters, every story we encounter is filled with death, murder, and escape. Escape that Ethan needed but could not achieve until the very end. But the stories that we do get to read in the game gives us a horrific inside view of Ethan's own mind. Some stories get so graphic that you ask yourself, can a child write this? And it seems to be the question that Ethan's own mind seems to be subconsciously asking itself. In the beginning of the game, Paul Prospero says this:
Ethan's letter started out just like any other fan mail. But soon there were mentions of things no little boy should know about.
And since Paul is nothing but Ethan's own imagination, it means Ethan's own mind is raising this question. Should a child know or be able to imagine so much death? Whatever the answer to this question is, we as players and viewers of this gripping narrative realize that this aspect of the game is just as vague as Ethan's own stories. And we are all free to draw our own conclusions. Ethan is either a multi-dimensional and very complex character or just a blank slate for us to project ourselves onto. Whatever he is, or whatever this game's conclusion you think you came upon, one thing is for sure. The vanishing life of Ethan Carter is a milestone in narrative-based video games and something the future games have and can take inspiration from. Well, thank you so much for watching the review of this game, guys. If you have any more thing to say about the game, or you thought that I left something out that you can add to it, do mention it in the comment section down below, and I'll be sure to have a nice little chat about it with you. You can also click here to watch the gameplay of this game that I played, and please like and subscribe if you feel like it. No pressure. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.